If Nelson Mandela saw what was happening to his beloved nation right now, what would he say? Let me put it this way. Whose side would Nelson Mandela be on?
Wow. That's the question of the year.
Ever since the extraordinary scene in the Oval Office with the president of South Africa confronted with what appeared to be incredibly violent, racist, and unacceptable civilizational behavior, there have been a lot of passion. There's been a lot of opinions. There's been a lot of fire. There's been a lot of accusations, but sadly, not a whole lot of facts about what's really going on in South Africa. It's amazing how many people in America or in Western Europe seem to have super strong opinions about what's going on in South Africa when they've never actually had the benefit of being there, let alone living there. Well, let's bring in a guest who hopefully can shed a little bit of facts on this issue, and then you, our great viewers and listeners, will be able to arrive at the truth. His name is Rob Herzov, and Rob, you, if you can do your own introduction, but you were born in South Africa. You're an entrepreneur. You're incredibly successful. But frankly, you don't need this headache. You can live on an island somewhere and be perfectly happy. Tell me why this issue is so important to you as a South African, multi-generational South African.
Larry, thanks for that. It's exactly what my wife's saying, can you please stop this outreaching, this podcasting, and let's go live on an island somewhere.
I said, no.
Again,
If I were your wife or your kid, I'd be like, God, Dad, come on.
exactly. And actually, Cape Town is a little bit of an island. We're at the absolute bottom corner of Africa. Sort of the Cape Peninsula, Cape Town itself is almost surrounded by the ocean. And the only way out is north into Africa. And all planes that fly down to South Africa turn around and fly back.
Yeah.
So we are the end of the world. But I'll give you a quick potted history, a potted background, potted bio. I was born in 1960 in Johannesburg, South Africa, fifth generation South African. My mother's side came from England and Scotland and arrived in 1870 with the British Army into South Africa. My dad's family are from Eastern Europe and Russia, had escaped from that sort of side of the world in 1896 and made their way through Lithuania, England to South Africa. And I was born into great wealth in South African terms and was given every opportunity. I did school, university, military service in South Africa, then Goldman Sachs, Wall Street, Harvard Business School. And then I worked as Rupert Murdoch's right-hand man. So I spent 7 years, incredible years in America in 85 to 92, then went to Europe. And after 31 years of living overseas, abroad from South Africa, I returned to South Africa early 2017. And I was given advice: do not get involved in politics. Do not put your head above the parapet. Only invest in businesses that have revenues, that 90% of the revenues are in hard currencies, dollars and pounds or euros. And what have I done? Building Cape Town's second airport. And I've become a lightning rod for politics. I've become one of the most prominent activists, capitalist activists, free market activists, anti-ANC activists online, and had a lot of their threats and been deplatformed and had to step down from businesses that I founded. It's only downside as it seems, but I think I'm moving the needle.
I mean, honestly, it sounds like the recent history of the American president, who really didn't, he says it all the time, I didn't need this. I could be living in Mar-a-Lago playing golf every day. But he's a patriot, and he saw what was wrong, and he thought he could fix it. And it sure sounds like a similar story here. So real quickly, because what I want to do is sort of address the most recent news and what we've all been dealing with since that scene at the Oval Office, and then go back and sort of reconstruct how we got here. But quickly, I know that everybody hearing this will say, oh, well, this guy is a rich, white South African. He made all his money on the oppression and the facts and slavery and apartheid and all of it. And I don't mean to oversell it, because I think that there, frankly, might be a germ of truth to that. You were privileged. You benefited from the horrific racism of apartheid. How do you reconcile that?
So my grandfather founded our mining industrial company in the 1940s. And from the 1950s onwards till probably mid-1990s, we were one of the top 10 mining industrial companies in South Africa. And, it's easy on the one hand to say, we had privilege, it was easy, we built the business on the back of, white black servitude. But the reality is nobody gave us a single inch. We weren't wanted in the country either. We weren't loved. The Afrikaners and the Anglos were the dominant sort of white tribe, and we had to make our own way. So whatever market you're in, however big it is, whatever the dynamics, it isn't easy. It isn't easy if there's free markets and you've got to get on with it. But the reality was there was apartheid, and apartheid stands for separateness. There's no H-A-T-E in the word, it's H-E-I-D. And the Dutch and the Afrikaans translation is separateness. And there's a cultural issue that people tend not to want to talk about, tend to avoid. But when the 1820 British settlers arrived in Port Natal, Durban, and met the main tribe of South Africa, the Zulus didn't have the written word. They were hundreds of years behind the British and behind the Afrikaners, the Dutch settlers, and have been catching up in the process. And I'm not making any excuses for apartheid. It is what it is. It was unsustainable. It was unacceptable. Our family voted against it. We fought against it. But the reality was, those civilizations, let's call them those civilizations, those cultures, were hundreds of years apart. And if you're in the shoes, if you're in the hat of somebody of the 1820s, the 1890s, the early 1900s, would you look at a majority group that have only recently kind of begun to evolve into an equal-ish society, an equal-ish world? Would you say, hey, let's give everyone democracy? You wouldn't. You'd think this doesn't work. This can't work. So what system are we going to introduce? Well, you've got dictatorships, benevolent dictatorships, and then you've got what the Afrikaner government that was voted in 1948 decided on, apartheid. Let us have separate development, separate areas, separate opportunities, and operate separately and interact as and when required. Now, that evolved into something very unpleasant, which is where the black people had to carry passes to come into white areas. And, the government spending was skewed heavily towards the white people at its worst. This is at its worst, okay? White students, but the budget allocated to white high school and junior school students was 18 times greater than to black high school and junior students at its worst. And that's unacceptable. It's unplayable. And in 1985, the Afrikaner government said, apartheid's not sustainable. We need to get rid of it. Fast forward, 1994, peaceful transition from white minority rule
Right.
to
As you said,
majority.
you supported that, your family supported that, and we're going to jump to that a little bit later, because I think that, frankly, as an American, sadly, we don't always have the biggest worldview, and we've had a lot on our mind over the last couple of decades with the war on terror and all the other things that we've been doing. We sort of checked out of South Africa. It's like, oh, Nelson Mandela's out, African National Congress. And by the way, the ANC, when they got the leadership in South Africa, they got it because of the white vote as well. The white vote was a major part of that movement. So we just sort of thought, okay, they're going to be fine now. So I want to know what happened, and we are going to get to that. I really do. And I don't want one thing to be sort of left unsaid. When you talk about the sort of backward nature of the Zulus and the various tribes when the colonists arrived there, of course, you're not suggesting that the reason they were backward had anything to do with their genetic makeup or color of skin. It just was the cultural isolation that they experienced, and you can't just flip a switch for any culture, regardless of the color of skin.
When the British sailors first arrived on the shores of Japan, Japan had its cultural identity, and the British had their cultural identity, and whether one was more advanced than the other, you make up your own mind on that. But certainly the British had weaponry and ships, and had technology, had an military industrial complex, let's use that word, vastly ahead of what the Japanese had. The Japanese were still using swords and spears. And the
Perfectly
British had
analogous.
cannons. The British had cannons. So
Yeah,
had the
exactly.
British arrived in force, they would have absolutely dominated Japan. So think about it in the same way.
Perfectly.
And then you think at how long does it take to catch up? How long does it take, when you give everyone equal access, equal opportunity? Forget equal result. That's socialism and communism. Equal access and equal opportunity. How long does it take a civilization to catch up with another civilization? And that's still an open question in this country. And I like to raise it all the time.
So the Trump administration offers refugee status and asylum to Afrikaner farmers who made the case, by the way, legally, the way we Americans expect foreigners to ask for asylum in their country at the embassy, made the case, said that they were being persecuted because of the color of their skin. That is an appropriate and acceptable legal grounds for refugee status. It was granted. President Ramaphosa of South Africa goes ballistic, says these are cowards, said none of this is happening, everything's fine. He demands a face-to-face with President Trump. He got what he asked for. So when you were watching that scene in the Oval Office, did you have a hunch that President Trump and the national security team was going to make that presentation? And I'd love to hear what your impression was in terms of how that played out on the world stage.
Firstly, I think Donald Trump was actually quite calm, charming, and he was very, very tactical and very strategic. He was the only one that spoke. Elon Musk gave his, eagle eye, vampire stare,
Oh, no,
and I
we would
don't blame him
that. It was
because I had the same feeling as Elon Musk. I was angry that Ramaphosa was there. I was angry he was not being Zelensky'd by Trump. And I was angry that he brought with him, as he called, his white agricultural minister. Why didn't you just say, here's my agricultural minister? And then a South African businessman, billionaire, and two golfers who were trying to deflect what they expected Donald Trump to be doing against Ramaphosa. And what are they? Are they the sock puppets of Ramaphosa? Were they protecting Ramaphosa? Why were they there? Anyway, put that aside for a second. I was incredibly impressed by Donald Trump's restraint, but even more impressed that he held up another political party, not Ramaphosa's evil and kleptocratic ANC, my words. He focused on Julius Malema and the economic freedom fighters. Those are the Red Berets. Those are the people jumping up and down, 100,000 of them in stadiums, shouting, singing, kill the Boer, kill the farmer, one settler, one bullet, and we will slit the throat of whiteness, but not yet. And he was very clever, Trump, because he didn't directly pick on Ramaphosa as I was hoping, and as Ramaphosa deserved. He was clever enough to focus on the EFF and say, look at what's happening in your country. Surely this is hate speech. Surely this is inciting farm murders. And surely you should be arresting this human being.
Yeah.
And Ramaphosa ducked and dived, and he was giggling he was so nervous.
You,
But it was
you,
brilliant, brilliant, brilliant. Trump was brilliant.
And the President Ramaphosa, he sort of tried to pretend like, this is a couple of outliers. They have a constitutional right for their speech, but it's a minority. We've got a picture here, exactly what you're talking about. This is one of those rallies. This is describe what we're seeing here. You say the Red Berets. By the way, I love the communist Cuban authoritarian flag flying there too. This is one of those rallies where they're all singing that kill the Boer, kill the white farmer song.
If you just had those people instead of in red berets in brown shirts, and you had a Nazi flag, 1933, it is identical. And the EFF have, I think it's 9% of the electorate. The electorate, 60 million people. I mean, they're not all of voting age, but 60 million people, let's say 10% EFF. That's 6 million people in this country that want to kill white people, kick people off their farms, That's not just a minority sideline group. That's a real threat. And they're not the only bad guys. That's the EFF. There's a party in between the EFF and the ANC called MK, Umkhonto we Sizwe, the Spear of the Nation, which was the terrorist arm of the ANC prior to 1994. And it has been taken over by Jacob Zuma, the president of South Africa from 2008 to 2017, who brought in something called state capture. And state capture was capturing all the state-owned enterprises, all the positions of power, and all the budgets, even down to town and village levels, so they could loot and steal this country and its economy to death. And they did.
Kleptocracy. And that sort of brings us, or it will bring us, let's put a pin in that, because I do want to talk about how this happened, how we moved from the heyday of, the what was happening in the 90s. All right. One of the dominant conversations after that scene in the Oval Office here in American media, which I'm sure you know by now, is almost entirely dominated by intellectual liberals who
lefties.
Yes, the left, was that it is a lie and misrepresentation and outright slander to describe the scene on the ground right now in South Africa as a genocide. That seemed to be one of the biggest controversies. So luckily, we don't have to guess about this. We don't have to reach an opinion or agree to disagree. There is an agreed upon international standard for the definition of genocide. Let's bring this up here. This is actually from the Genocide Watch website affiliated with the United Nations. You can see it on your screen, can't you, Rob?
Well, it's beautiful because if you look at those 10, we don't have extermination. There is no extermination right now.
I like this. Yeah, I was going to ask you which ones you do have. Is it easier to just say what you don't have? Because
we have classification, we have symbolization, we definitely have discrimination. We've got 140 race-based laws in our country. 114, that's 114, were added since 1994.
Okay. That is the definition of systematic discrimination there.
Dehumanization. There are black podcasters. There's a black podcaster called Nota, N-O-T-A, who about a month ago called white people Neanderthals. So there's that's happening. Organization. There are special groups within the police and military enforcing the policies of black economic empowerment, expropriation without compensation. All of these new amendments to the laws that are just making the noose tighter and tighter. Yep. Polarization, the hate speech that's being. If kill the boy and kill the farmer isn't hate speech, I don't know what is.
That's government propaganda, absolutely.
And there is persecution. We'll talk about farm attacks in a second, and a lot of denial. Cyril Ramaphosa goes, farm attacks. Well, South Africa is a violent society. There are murders all the time. We've got the highest murder rate in the world. Farm attacks, farm murders, nothing special. That is not true. And I will give you statistics right now to prove the most dangerous profession in South Africa is being a farmer. There are 2 farm attacks a day. 30,000 commercial farmers in South Africa, 3 million in America. Just give you the size. There are 2 farm attacks a day in South Africa, 2 farm murders a week. And of the farm murders, 20% involve rape and torture. Now, if it was purely economic, why would you have rape and torture involved in a farm attack? Right. Okay. Yeah. And Cyril Ramaphosa and his white lapdogs that were in the White House with him, defending him, but like, it's a violent society. It
sounded like their only defense was, oh, hey, everybody's getting raped and murdered in South Africa.
But that's not true, because you are 3 times more likely to be murdered as a farmer in South Africa, and not just white farmers, but as a farmer in South Africa, than as a policeman. It's 3 times more dangerous being a farmer than a policeman, and twice as dangerous to be a policeman than an average citizen. So there is no question the most dangerous profession in South Africa is being a farmer. And Cyril Ramaphosa dismisses it as, it's just, South Africa is a dangerous society. And Johan Rupert, South African billionaire in the White House, said something I think he's going to regret to his dying day. He goes, I sleep with my bedroom door open. Well, he's got about 100 million rand of security involved, and he lives in London. So who is he defending? What is he?
I don't know. We're seeing headlines out of London too. Maybe he is bragging about being pretty courageous. But yes,
maybe living in Henley is not that. Maybe it's quite scary, but you can live with your door open.
So we've just ticked off the line by line on genocide, and it looks as though at the very least 8, if not 9. The only thing that's open right now is extermination. I made this comment when this happened because so many people on the left we're downplaying this, saying, "Oh, it's not genocide." It's not. So how many people need to be murdered before they suddenly say it's a genocide? Is this a quantity issue? And by the way, these are the same people who months after the Rwandan genocide became obvious to everyone, they all were wringing their hands saying, "Oh, if only we had known at the time, if only we had said something." Well, this is the chance to know. This is a chance to say something.
100%. Rwanda is a very good example because in 1994, the Rwandan genocide took place. And over 3 months, from April through to June, every day, 10,000 people a day were being killed. The United Nations did nothing.
Yeah.
And the French military, there are photographs of the French standing there watching it take place. I mean, I've never liked France as a country with its foreign policies, but this was horrific.
Yeah.
And we had civil unrest, by the way. We had really bad civil unrest 4 years ago in an area called KwaZulu-Natal, driven by the Zulus. And it spread up to Johannesburg, but it didn't spread across the rest of the country. And if, shopping malls were burned down, houses were attacked, people were attacked in their cars on the roads. It got very, very bad. And it was only, the South Africa only survived because the citizens, black, white, colored, and Indian, came together with their own arms to defend one another and defend property and defend shopping malls against this orchestrated civil unrest and terror. And it was proven to be orchestrated. And worst of all, the police and army did nothing. They stood by and watched. So the positive out of that is there's very unlikely to ever have a successful civil unrest in our country, despite our population having the highest unemployment in the world, 33% unemployment in the world, 60% youth unemployment. And you think that's a tinder keg for civil unrest, but I think civil unrest will not succeed in this country as a result. But it's, the Cyril Ramaphosa, things aren't so bad. We're a sovereign country, Mr. Trump. You should leave us alone. We know what we're doing. And then these people he brought with him, backing him and supporting him. And sort of, for Retief Goosen, actually, the two golfers were pretty good. Retief Goosen said, well, my family are farmers in South Africa and they've been attacked. And
yeah, I remember, Matt. He turned to the one golfer thinking that he was going to have his bag in a row. Said, "No, actually, yeah, Mr. Trump, we do have a problem down here." That was a great.
And Ernie Els was pretty good. He said, "Look, you don't correct a wrong by doing another wrong." But what were they doing there? Protecting Cyril Ramaphosa, defending the ANC. The ANC has deindustrialized our country in the last 30 years. They've broken every single state-owned enterprise, and on every metric, employment, health, education, we are now ranked almost at the bottom of the world. Whereas in 1994, South Africa had the best airline in the world and phenomenal electricity supply commission, roads that worked. We had a magnificent infrastructure, the best in Africa. The ANC has broken and stolen us.
Yeah. And they had the support and the goodwill of the world, of the planet.
But let's talk about that. Larry, you raise a good point. So what happened? 1994 to about 2008, the Western world solved South Africa. Okay? Everybody, like our international pressure, our sanctions, us standing with the ANC. Look what happened. The apartheid government gave in. There was a peaceful transition to democracy. There was an extraordinary thing called the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. And in South Africa, that was formed because Nelson Mandela and F.W. de Klerk, the president, who together won the Nobel Peace Prize, realized that, South Africa had been through very, very unpleasant and tough times. And there were, a lot of unsolved crimes, terrible things have happened. And you cannot carry that forward with you if you're going to have a successful country. We have to unite and we have to forgive. How do you do that? Right. Anyone who did a crime under the apartheid government, whether you did it independently or under instruction, you come to the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, tell the truth, and you're forgiven. And you tell the truth in a public forum, maybe in front of the parents who lost their child or someone who couldn't find their, husband who was taken to jail by the apartheid police. And for the next 14 years, 1994 to 2008, we grew at 3-4% a year, added 500,000 new jobs a year. Everything worked. There was a meritocracy. People were pulled into jobs. Things worked. Why did they work? Because the Western world were kind of like, it's solved. We've done our job. Let's go look at another country we can fix or focus on. And Nelson Mandela was an extraordinary man because built into the ANC basic doctrine, which was written in 1969, was called the National Democratic Revolution. And it was written by people trained in Soviet Russia. Most of the Jacob Zumas and the other ANC people were either living inside South Africa, working for trade unions, or they were outside part of Mkhonto weSizwe, the MK armed wing of the ANC, who blew up post offices and police stations and things like killed not just soldiers and police, but women and children too. And they were trained by the Russians, the Soviets. And the National Democratic Revolution policy document was basically the Soviet playbook, the long game. But from 1994 to 2008, 94 to,
Yeah, I just want to jump in. You said this was written in '69, right? Because
which was,
so yeah, because I have a memory. Because I remember I was paying attention during the Reagan years. That's when the pressure on the apartheid government really started to begin. And I do remember during the Cold War, there were some voices in America saying, "Listen, we recognize apartheid is terrible, and we don't like it, and we're going to try to use peaceful diplomatic efforts to make some change there." But ultimately, the ANC and the guys who are the opponents of apartheid, they're in bed with the Soviets, and this is the Cold War. They're our allies. South Africa's our ally, as bad as they are, and that sucks. But during the Cold War and during lots of wars, you end up becoming allies with countries that aren't perfect. And again, I'm not making excuses, but that
you're
was the
right.
rationale. I remember that argument, and now you're validating that with the Soviet,
So
fingerprints.
I was an infantry officer in the South African infantry from 1983 to 1980. I did my 2 years national service. And in 1985, when I went to Goldman Sachs in New York, South Africa was having raging battles in Angola against, the MPLA, which was the Soviet-trained and armed Angolan military, backed by Cuba and Russia. And they even brought in Cuban pilots to fly the MiGs against us. And there were huge pitched tank battles in Angola, which South Africa won. South Africa beat the MPLA.
All these little satellite dust-ups. That's the thing about the Cold War. Everyone says, "Oh, Cold War, there was no shooting." No, there was shooting. We didn't do the shooting, but a lot of other countries did the shooting with our backing.
I love the way you say satellite dust-ups. This is a bit, in our view, it was a big
A
one.
little bit more than that. Okay.
Yeah.
So basically, you've got this Soviet virus that was embedded into the
ANC.
founding documents of the ANC.
Correct.
So
And
what happened?
it's a long game. So they get to power. And in the process of getting to power, 1992 to 1995, and this is not documented, but you can read up about it all over the place, the ANC basically murdered thousands and thousands of other Black people, mainly members of the Inkatha Freedom Party, the Zulu royalists, who tend to be Christian, conservative, slow-moving, and tribal. And that was the main enemy of the ANC. And the ANC murdered thousands and thousands of them. It's horrific what they did within South Africa. They didn't come after the white people. They came after the main Black opposition and and smashed them. They never quite recovered.
To consolidate their power. So that they were the only.
Step number one in the Soviet playbook, take out any future opposition.
Yeah.
And then they began implementing laws. But with Mandela sort of in charge and Thabo Mbeki, who followed him, he was kind of a technocrat, pragmatist. South Africa did very well till 2008. And everybody went in the world, we're done, solve, move on. But in 2008, Jacob Zuma, trained in Russia, takes power. He becomes president. And that's when the rot begins. And that's when the Soviet playbook gets accelerated, but massively accelerated. And then Cyril Ramaphosa, our current president, comes in 2017. Everyone thinks, oh, we're saved, we're relieved, we've got off Zuma. And Ramaphosa's been just as bad. He's charming, he's well-spoken, he was a trade unionist, then he became a dollar billionaire in South Africa, but only as a result of Black economic empowerment. Businesses were given to him on a plate and given to his family members, the Radebis, the Motsepis. Now, that name, Patrice Motsepe, people have been saying lately, he should come in as president. He's Cyril Ramaphosa's brother-in-law. He spends all his time in Cannes, a Cannes Film Festival in Los Angeles. He's never going to do it. I mean,
So it's a communist kleptocracy, it sounds like.
well, it is. It's
with
keep
the tribal
capitalism,
to it. Yeah.
keep capitalism, but control the commanding heights of industry, of the state-owned enterprises, and then this thing called cadre deployment, C-A-D-R-E. South Africans say cadre, but it's cadre. And cadre deployment was formed in, I think, 2005. And on the original committee, secret committee, which we now have all the documentation, was Cyril Ramaphosa.
Okay.
And their aim was to put loyalists into all the positions of power in South Africa. If you even go, it's not just the head of South African Airways, the head of the Electricity Supply Commission. It's anyone that controlled a budget anywhere. So even in a small town, the head of the sewage works, the person who'd be getting up in the morning, working hard to keep the sewage clean, flowing, and fix the pipes, was replaced with a cadre, with an ANC loyalist who in most cases was completely incompetent, and his job was only to steal the money.
Now, you obviously make it sound as though this is a classic government political corruption in the old Soviet style, where it doesn't make, just control. What you hear apologists say, or people who are rationalizing everything you described, is say this was racial reconciliation. That person who was in charge of the sewage pipes, well, he needed to be replaced because he only had that position because of his skin color. It was an old hang-on from the apartheid days. We need to start reconciling the racial disparities so we move.
Of course. Call it transformation. What it really was kleptocracy and combined with ineptocracy. So malevolence, evil, Soviet playbook, but bring in really stupid people because we don't have anyone else, bluntly.
Yeah.
And what happens to our economy? Our economy goes from growing at 3 to 4% to where it is today, 1% growth with 2% population growth. And that's been like that for the last 8 years. I'll give you another stat. You ready for this? Are you sitting down? Our fixed investment as a percentage of GDP is 15%. An emerging market country should be at 25%. The last 10 years, South Africa has deindustrialized. And it's not just the DEI, it's not just the CRT, it's not just the leftist ideology that's sort of racism and socialism in motion. It's the absolute destruction of the best economy in Africa because because if they break things, they can steal. It's a mafia organization. The ANC is evil and corrupt. And anyone who says it's transformation, the whites deserve it, is a typical leftist. I mean, that's what they're saying.
They're making up for the past sins of that. But you tell me that's what the reconciliation in the 90s and early 2000s were. I want to take you to another thing that we saw in the media quite a bit. This is CNN.
The Communist News Network.
This person's name is Ashley Allison. She actually worked in the Biden and Harris campaigns, but I think she speaks for a lot of people in the left-wing media in this reaction to—
I dislike her already.
Here we go, watch.
And part of that is that the people who are native to that land deserve their rightful land back. That is not what the Afrikaners actually want to have happen, which are the white Africans, and so who are not originally from Africa, who colonized South Africa also. And so that is what they are saying is discrimination. Now, if the Constitution in South Africa is discriminatory, they have their checks and balances in that land, just like we do. And that is for them to— so if the Afrikaners don't actually like the land, they can leave that country.
They're leaving to come here.
No, they can
these
leave
refugees
and go,
are coming here.
They can actually leave and go to where their native land is, which is probably Germany.
Are you against—
Okay, there's a lot of stupid to unpack there, Rob. I'm sorry for
She
giving you
is a moron. She's a moron. You heard it here first. Ashley Allison, you're a moron.
So let's start with the last thing she said, which is, listen, you're newcomers there. You're not native to that land. You colonized. So if you don't like it, go back to Germany, where you're from.
So when did Ashley Allison get to America? The Afrikaner, right. the Afrikaners have been in South Africa since 1652. And when they got to the Cape, there were no black tribes there, none. There were the Khoisan, these primitive, people, and the Struntloopers, the beach walkers. The main black tribes had migrated down from East Africa. The Nguni said, but they're settlers too. If I'm a settler, they're a settler. And by the way, the Mayflower arrived in 1620.
In 20.
Afrikaners arrived 1652. So
Yeah.
if we're supposed to clear off somewhere else, what about you guys leaving to go back to where you all came from? And the Afrikaners are Africans. I'm white tribe of Africa. They are too. Ashley Allison has no right to be in America. She should get back to wherever the hell she
It's
comes
funny,
from.
her argument there is akin to somebody in the civil rights years of the 60s saying, you don't like
Right.
it here, go back to where you come from. But,
Well,
wouldn't
we don't
be-
want her back if she came from South Africa. We really don't. You can keep her.
I want to unpack something because I think that the vocabulary used here, terminology, is so fascinating when you refer to yourself as a white tribe of Africa. So that's like someone of European descent like me in America saying, well, I'm just another American Indian tribe, a white
No,
skin.
but you're American.
Yeah.
You're American.
Right.
People go to America. You go to Germany, you don't become German. You go to Japan, you don't go Japanese. You go to America, you are American.
It's the terminology of being a tribe, though. I think that is fascinating to those of us who actually, you consider yourself just another tribe in Africa, but a white tribe.
Yes, we belong in Africa. We're Africans. But the Afrikaners have been in South Africa for 14 generations. 14 generations. And the first time that the Afrikaner tribe, I'm the Anglo tribe, first time the Afrikaner tribe met any real black tribes of South Africa was at the Fish River, 600 kilometers from Cape Town. There weren't black tribes down there. They had been migrating over the last 1,600 years from East Africa. So if we're settlers, they're settlers too. So the fact this idiot Ashley Allison say it's their land just because they happen to be black is rubbish. I mean, it's fuzzy leftist thinking. Doesn't work.
The other part of Ms. Allison's mental level Yale dissertation there was, hey, you've got
Yale.
a constitution. Yeah, no, I'm just guessing it was Yale. Could be wrong.
DEI. She got in
Well,
for
what would
DEI.
I say? You have to go to an Ivy League school and get an advanced degree to be that stupid. That's sad.
Hang on, I went to Harvard Business School, but in the old days.
She said, listen, you've got a constitution. This is the law of the land. You got to abide by the law of the land. You don't like it, either try to change your laws or just go back to where you came from. How do you respond?
We are trying to change the laws. So in May 2024, for the first time in 30 years, the ANC Democratic election went from 56% to 40%. Their population is collapsing. And in 2029, they'll be at 15%, because even the average voter, poor, unemployed, scared about their future, at risk from security, knows that the ANC is not delivering. The ANC is the problem, and the ANC has failed them. But as with democracy, things move very slowly. These are people, they're called gogos. A gogo is an older lady. And these gogos lived through apartheid, saw the ANC as their liberation, and is finding it quite hard to admit the fact the ANC has actually destroyed the country. The ANC is worse than apartheid, because they've impoverished everyone. They're an equal opportunity impoverisher. And the Gogos are getting there. I mean, the younger people that are called born frees, who were not born during apartheid, are not voting for the ANC.
Interesting.
And the urban black that has a salaried black person is not voting for the ANC. And here's a terrible thing. Black economic empowerment used to mean, in the 90s and early 2000s, previously disadvantaged, which meant black people, colored people, which is a combination of black and white, and Indian people, those of Indian heritage, because they also weren't white under apartheid. But today, the only people that benefit from black economic empowerment, which is a law, and a horrific law that's destroying our country, are certain black people. And there was an article a week ago that said 100 trillion rand has been transferred to 100 families.
Wow.
So it's just been rape, pillage,
So there's discrimination against mixed race people as well.
Yeah,
This is,
Indians, coloreds, yeah,
like
then
Third Reich.
they're not black enough.
I
That's what
want to
it is.
bring this image up again, and in the imagery of the Third Reich. Here we are back to you, as you liken them, the brown shirts instead of the red berets in this stadium, and this is tens of thousands filling a stadium here, and they were singing this song, this chant, "Kill the boar, kill the boar." We've all seen this. A boar is a white farmer. The president, your guy, Amafroza, he was asked specifically about this song in front of President Trump, but also to the media. Here's what he said to the media just a few days ago. Take a look.
Yes, this one. We are a very proud sovereign country that has its own laws, that has its own processes, and we take into account what the Constitutional Court also decided when it said that, that slogan, "Kill the boer, kill the farmer," is a liberation chant and slogan, and it's not meant to be a message that elicits or calls upon anyone to go and be killed.
Now, he says that the Constitutional Court, I guess he means your Supreme Court if you have one, they have judged and ruled that this song is not meant to provoke violence, so it should be fine. Is that really what we're hanging our hat on here?
Larry, Cyril Ramaphosa is a clown. I'm sorry. He's spineless and a clown. How dare he call the refugees cowards? He's the coward. He's the coward for not standing up for South Africa. But on this specific issue, remember I mentioned state capture. So Jacob Zuma, president, instituting the Soviet playbook, puts into positions of power head of South African Airways, a failed teacher, head of Electricity Supply Commission, head of Denel, head of our rail network, puts in loyalists, whose job is to steal money for the ANC and for this Gupta family that was kind of playing the ANC. It wasn't just industry that was captured by the ANC, it was the judiciary as well.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
And when Erdogan, the president of Turkey, got elected, the first thing he did was change the constitution. He had enough votes to change the constitution. And the very first thing he did after changing the constitution, he fired 6,000 judges overnight and replaced them with loyalists. Why? To get all legal decisions going his way. And the ANC has done that. I did some work on this, and I reckoned, it was about 2 years ago, I reckoned it took 6 years to fully compromise a judiciary by replacing judge by judge, lawyer by lawyer, judge by judge, to a point where I believe, my estimate today is that 60 to 70% of judges in South Africa, local, regional, national, federal, have been compromised, are effectively loyalists to the ANC.
Well,
and on big issues like this, the judgment will go the way the ANC wants it to. The Constitutional Court is captured.
As I said at the beginning of this interview, we want to throw facts out there. We want to educate our viewers and our listeners, let them, and of course, research themselves. On this issue in particular, I've done my own research. You're 100% right. In fact, I think it was 7, 8, maybe 10 years ago, the same court actually said, oh, yeah, this is a hate song. This is a hate chant. This is, and they did ban it. They did say, and then it was just recently on appeal when the makeup of the court was changed to the ANC's liking. We have to wrap things up here, sadly, and I'm glad that we were able to, delve into this and sort of really flesh out a lot of the misinformation that, sadly, the American audiences have gotten. What can be done now? What's next? My understanding is the small trickle of African farmers that have come here and have caused such an uproar in America pales in comparison. Apparently, you're just flooding Australia right now, as there is an absolute exodus from South
Australia, New Zealand, and Britain.
Yeah.
The only positive is
South Africa. You don't want to see that happen. What can be done? It seems insurmountable.
So the only positive is for Britain, Australia, and New Zealand. Their IQ's gone up considerably, and they're going to get a lot better at sport very quickly. No, but seriously, what can be done? Very little in South Africa, because the democratic process is working. Our next national election is 2029. But will our economy survive those next 4 years? No, it'll fall apart. We need America. We need America. It's you. is our only chance. We need Congressman Ronnie Jackson's bill to be strengthened, to go through Congress, go through Senate, and for America to sanction, and it's a nice long list, including Cyril Ramaphosa, the people who are conducting hate speech, who are stealing the country blind, who are being anti-Semitic, anti-American, and who are doing the evil that is being done, DEI in motion, as Donald Trump correctly says, farm attacks. We need those people to be put on sanction list, put on the Magnitsky Act, put on the SDN list, and punished, and hopefully not punish the country itself. We can't fix this country internally, not in time. We need an external dynamic or crisis or opportunity, and the only country that is looking and is paying attention that will help us is you. And I want to thank America and thank Donald Trump's administration for pointing this out. And may I make one last suggestion?
Yes, sir.
Marco Rubio has as a special envoy an extraordinary Lebanese man who happens to be Donald Trump's, one of his kids' father-in-law.
Mm-hmm.
He is in charge of a special envoy to Africa. Get him to South Africa. Get him to come down here and have a look. Please, America. Please, Marco Rubio. Send him down here to have a closer look and come back and report on the facts.
One last question, Rob Herzov, and it's impossible to answer, but I want you to try. You mentioned earlier in our conversation that you believe that Nelson Mandela was a great man. And I think most Americans agree with that as well, despite the fact that the charter of ANC and some of the things that when he was desperately trying to fight against the government at the time did make him, sadly, too cozy with the Soviet Union, and you're sadly reaping the downside of that. If Nelson Mandela saw what was happening to his beloved nation right now, what would he say? Let me put it this way. Whose side would Nelson Mandela be on?
Wow. That's the question of the year. No, you've asked the question of the year. Nelson Mandela would be disgusted by the ANC. He would be disgusted by what's happening with the ANC, MK, and EFF. And he would most likely vote for the Democratic Alliance, the party I vote for. He would be horrified. What a question. Wow.
Thank you, Rob. I appreciate the conversation. It was a great one. Good luck to you. And we'll continue to watch this story. And as it develops, hopefully we can have you back to shed more light on what's happening.
Thank you, Larry. Thank you, America, for paying attention.
That is it for this special episode. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you share this conversation with other people that you may be engaging in a back and forth with over what's going on the ground in South Africa. We don't like to tackle the simple issues here, and we don't have all the answers, but at the very least, we can provide more information, more facts, and ultimately let you reach your conclusions. We respect you that much. Thanks for watching. My name's Larry O'Connor, but you can call me Larry.